Hi, everyone. Welcome to SPElive. I'm Trent Jacobs, and today we're talking to Adam Sieminski, the president of the King Abdullah Petroleum Studies and Research Center, known to many simply as KAPSARC. He's joining us in just a second from Riyadh, but I wanted to first mention that this month marks the one-year anniversary of the beginning of the latest oil price crash. We've since pulled out of the lows, and we're starting to get used to oil prices that are in the mid to high $60 range. Adam, I want to welcome you, and I thought that might be a great place for us to start today. Could you tell us, when you look at oil prices today, what does it tell you? Are we looking at a strong market recovery or something else?
Well, Trent, it's great to be with you. Thank you for the invitation, and shout out to all of the SPE members around the world. I think that what we're really seeing is the optimism associated with the recovery of economies around the world as vaccinations begin to take hold, and we hopefully move towards a more normalized level of demand looking forward. KAPSARC is forecasting now that demand will be up at least 4 million barrels a day in 2021 and about the same level again in 2022. And I've seen other forecasts that are even more aggressive than that based on what's been happening with the COVID crisis.
I should note that, Adam, you're the former administrator of the U.S. Information Agency, or Energy Information Agency, and so you bring a really unique perspective to this entire topic about markets from both sides of the world. In the last downturn, U.S. shale bounced back rather fast. And that also had people even questioning the role of OPEC back then and its ability to, sort of shape markets. Now it feels like a very different story. We're seeing a very constrained U.S. market. We're seeing OPEC Plus is being lauded for its discipline in pretty much all corners. So can you talk to me about this scenario, its sustainability and its meaningfulness on where we go from here?
Well, my experience with shale in the United States is that you should always think of shale as a resource that's there, and if the opportunities are right and the investment is available, the potential for shale to come back should not be discounted. But we're in kind of a very interesting period right now with shale. Much more financial discipline coming from Wall Street and investors in general concerning the desire for pretty clear returns on investment in shale, which is constraining the amount of capital going in. And a second factor, which is not as important as the first, but is out there, and that is, I think, a little bit more constraint from the current administration in Washington relative to environmental rules, pipeline construction, and other things that'll make a difference to shale production.
Yeah, I want to circle back before my next question, because you brought up investment, but I wanted to circle back to sort of the demand topic that you raised. Was the world too quick to write off, the idea of growing oil demand ever again when this all started to unfold? And how has the picture changed? Is there just more clarity, or is it emotional, or just people feeling more bullish?
Well, 20 years ago, I was arguing very strongly that the ability of petroleum engineers to figure out how to produce more oil argued very strongly against the idea of peak oil supply. Now, what we're seeing is many people arguing and discussing the concept of peak oil demand, part of the energy transition concept. And the transition is, well, we're going to move away from hydrocarbons towards renewables, energy efficiency, and other ways of producing and consuming energy that don't involve carbon dioxide. I think we're going to, I hope I'll have a chance, Trent, to talk about this a little bit more. But I believe that there are ways that hydrocarbons can be produced with a fairly low CO2 footprint that would allow the world to move towards the concept of net zero and Paris Agreement without abandoning one of our strongest resources, that's hydrocarbons, oil and gas, as we move out into the future.
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to ask you next was, as we transition into the energy transition, you need both. And, as a Texan, we just found out a couple weeks ago during a historic snowstorm that we need both wind power and natural gas to keep our lights on at the same time. And so you have to live with this energy mix, but that also requires, like you said, not abandoning oil and gas for the next, 10, 20, 30 years. And after every other downturn, we've always seen money flow right back into the oil and gas industry to take advantage of, the upside. KAPSARC just looked at this in a report published earlier this year and found that the investment cycle might be different this time around. You raised some concerns. Can you talk with us about that?
Yeah, well, I think that just looking at what's been going on in terms of investment and upstream activity over the course of the last year, when demand collapsed back in April and May, and the investment community began to seriously look at the kinds of returns that they were getting in shale, discipline has gone way up. And I think what that potentially could mean is that we are not going to see the quick bounce back in shale production that some people were anticipating, even with prices at their current levels. So I suspect that as you go out over the next few years, that the OPEC countries and others who have spare capacity will be critical in terms of maintaining stable oil markets, and I think that's quite doable. One other thought that goes with your question, Trent, is that hydrocarbons are still very important in the global economy, despite tremendous efforts and very successful and to be applauded efforts at improving efficiency and moving towards renewable energy sources. Hydrocarbons still are supplying more than 3/4 of the world's energy demand, and it's going to take a while to change that. So in addition to just the existing need for fuels, there are, depending on whose numbers you use, 1 billion people that don't have electricity, another 1 or 2 billion people that don't have clean cooking fuels, and finding ways to supply that even in the form of hydrocarbons is critical to global development and meeting the UN's goals to have healthy economies all over the world. So what's really critical is finding ways to use hydrocarbons in a environmentally sensitive way. Many companies are working on those ideas here in Saudi Arabia. The emissions footprint, both methane emissions, flaring, and carbon footprint for oil is one of the lowest in the world. And I think that kind of practice has to be repeated everywhere, and then we're going to be on a good path forward.
Yeah, no. So I want to get to the other side of this equation. So talking about renewables here, and we're talking about new, alternative forms of energy, and this is something I know that you spent a lot of time looking at. And before we got on here, I was mentioning to you that here at the SPE and in my unit with Journal Petroleum Technology, we see tons of interest in hydrogen. And if I look back sort of in my mental brain here about how trending topics have formed over the last few years in this industry, hydrogen just sort of kind of came out of nowhere in the last year or so as a really popular topic. And should we be wary of the excitement about things like that? Do these things have longer cycles than most of us are anticipating? In other words, is the hype around something like hydrogen real?
Hydrogen, I think, is real. There are several different ways of getting it, and in just a second I'll talk about that. But energy transitions take a lot of time. We've seen transitions before, from wood to coal, from coal to oil and gas, and now to renewables. But these are measured in decades, not just years, in terms of getting a significant proportion of consumption moved from one fuel to another. For hydrogen, there was a lot of excitement a couple of decades ago, and then it slowed down. I think people are now looking at it mainly because green hydrogen, or producing hydrogen from electricity that is renewable based, solar and wind in particular, is looking quite economic, and that's because the costs of wind have come down and the cost of solar panels has also been reduced significantly, and this makes generating hydrogen with electrolyzers and water very attractive. So that's green hydrogen. There's also blue hydrogen, and that's using natural gas or natural gas liquids as the underlying provider of the hydrogen, and that can be environmentally sensitive too, and that can meet the Paris Agreement goals if the CO2 produced in that process is stored or sequestered. That's been done here in Saudi Arabia just recently. A shipment of ammonia from hydrogen produced from natural gas was sent to Japan, and the ammonia was used there to reduce the emissions from coal plant. Experimenting with ideas like this, and on the green hydrogen side, the new city, an area of Neom in the northwest part of Saudi Arabia, is there's a big project involving Neom, Aqua Power, and Air Products to create green hydrogen and green ammonia. And I suspect there are going to be buyers in places like Germany and Japan for that fuel. Ammonia is often used as the transportation form for the hydrogen. Ammonia, NH3, is a way to pack a lot of hydrogen into a liquid that's easier to move around than hydrogen itself. Back to you, Trent.
Well, one of the interesting things about hydrogen, I guess, is that it seems like there's a lot of synergies with sort of the upstream, midstream, downstream nature of the oil and gas business, and so it really will be interesting to see how those synergies come together. One of the things that you talk a lot about at KAPSARC is this concept of the circular economy, and I was wondering if you could explain a little bit about this idea. What does it mean to see this thing at scale? And also, how do we think about the circular economy within the context of oil and gas?
Right. Well, I think this is really important going forward, and the kingdom is making huge strides in this area. Let me just briefly describe the circular carbon economy concept or the framework. Everybody's familiar with the idea of the linear economy. You produce something, you use it, and you dispose. We began to realize a long time ago that that was not a sustainable model, and the new model became the circular economy. And that was looking at material flows and finding ways to reduce the amount of material flows going into the economy, but still getting good value. Secondly, to recycle as much as possible, and third, reuse the materials. The circular carbon economy builds on the concepts of the circular economy principles, but adds a fourth R, and that's remove. And remove is dealing with carbon capture, utilization, and storage, and that can either be geologic storage, which the SPE members are very familiar with that idea, or even nature-based solutions. Seaweed as a way to store carbon, coastal plants like mangroves that can also store carbon, or even forests on land. So there are lots of ways, both geologically and nature-based, to store carbon, and we're exploring these now. I think everybody is around the world. You can even do things like direct air capture, capturing carbon dioxide right out of the air and then disposing of it. And this is a way to meet the idea of carbon balances in the economy, or net zero, as some people are referring to it, in a way that still allows the combustion of hydrocarbons and without violating the principles of the Paris Agreement.
Yeah, I love carbon sequestration as much as the next person, but I really like this idea about using, seaweed or biologics, and I've heard people talk about, even bolstering the root systems, and it came up with an idea for a company, carbon carrots, carbon negative carrots. We'll see if we see that kind of thing. Last thing for you, I'm just curious on the circular carbon economy, how do you see it integrating with industries? You mentioned direct air capture. This all sounds easier said than done when you try to put it into somebody's established business model. So are there examples that you've seen that work, either in the kingdom or elsewhere?
Right. Well, let me just come back really quickly to these nature-based solutions. These are scalable. The other big scalable solution is geologic storage. And there's certainly plenty of opportunities for that here in Saudi Arabia, but almost anywhere where oil and gas are produced in quantity, because they have the geologic reservoirs that, and strata, including water reservoirs that could be, deep, that could be used. The idea of the 4 R's of the circular carbon economy, again, reduce, reuse, recycle, and remove. Reduce is still going to be very important. Most of the projects that we have to deal with emissions right now are reduced. This is true everywhere in the world. So efficiency remains important. Renewables are going to remain important. Hydrogen can fit into this category, as well as a few of the others, and even nuclear is one of the reduce options. So pursuing all of these is going to be very important. Things like reuse and recycle can include biologic recycling in what we call living carbon. It can also include things like turning CO2 into fuels, into fertilizers, into ethanol, methanol, and other ways. You can even cure concrete with carbon dioxide. It makes it stronger. All of these things are going to require a lot of demonstration projects in order to prove out the economics. But moving along on these is going to be critically important. And the conclusion that I'd like to leave you with on this, Trent, is that it's going to be very important to look across all of these options, to be holistic, to be integrated, and practical in the way we approach these things. The way I like to think about it is, if you're going to build a house, you need a toolbox that has more than just a hammer. The world needs engineers, petroleum engineers, and others to dig into these options and to lead the way forward, actually, in providing the solutions that we all know are going to be necessary to deal with the climate challenges that we're facing.
Well, Adam, I think that's a great place to stop. And yes, it sounds like the call for innovation, innovative minds is out there. And these are all really exciting jobs or, ideas to think about that will become jobs someday. And I'm really happy that you shared some of your insights with us. And thank you, everybody, for watching. And I'll let you get back to your job, Adam.
Well, this is part of the job. We're both working here, Trent, and what we're really trying to do is to get people excited about these ideas and to push the envelope forward as much as possible. And I'm delighted to be with you and the Society of Petroleum Engineers around the world to talk about these things. And I do hope you invite me back.
We will. Well, thank you. Likewise, this was a great conversation. We'll have more of them in the future.